So a brief introduction to Alexice. She is a Trickle Up's Burkina Faso country coordinator and a native Burkinabe. She leads the implementation of our program on the ground in West Africa, and previously she worked with USAID and a women's human rights organization in Mali on women's rights and economic development in the region. So I'll just hand it over to Alexice, and she'll open it up for questions and answers.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining this call to learn a little bit more about our program here in Burkina. So first, I would really like to start off by thanking you all for the generous contributions that you've made to our program here in Burkina. Your belief in our mission and the importance of our work is really appreciated, and most of all, it's allowing us to do some very important work here on the ground. So for that reason, I'm happy to be talking with you today about who we reach out to with our program, how we do it, and what we're able to accomplish with our program. So to start off, just to understand who we work with, the women of Trickle Up, the ultra-poor really in Burkina, I think it's important to understand where they come from and what the conditions are, the circumstances surrounding their lives that have led them to lead a life of extreme poverty. So without really wanting to focus too much on country statistics, I'll just touch upon them in general terms just to help to situate these women in a broader context before I talk more intimately about their lives. So here in Burkina, we are a country of about 60 million people, ranked 183rd out of 187 of the poorest countries in the world based on the Human Poverty Index. And as a landlocked and resource-poor country, we face particularly difficult economic conditions. And in the past, our main export was cotton, and although we're still the #1 producer of cotton in Africa, this has really been overshadowed by the gold mining industry, which now brings in the big money. But it's important to mention because it's also significantly contributed to a shifting in livelihood strategies of the populations that we work with. And this also further increases their vulnerability. So a majority of the Burkina-based population is rural, about 80%, and about 95% of that 80% is dependent on subsistence farming to feed their families. So if we consider the increasingly erratic nature of our Sahelian climate, the climate in the Sahel is really characterized by an extended dry season and a very short rain season. So, rural populations have to capitalize on that short rainy season to ensure their subsistence for the entire year. So really any fluctuation in rain patterns has a direct impact on their livelihood and their ability to feed their families for the year to come. So as a reference point, GDP per capita in Burkina is approximately $580 a year, comes out to just under $50 a month. However, the national poverty line sits at $166 annually, and that's not a misstatement. That would mean that equals about $15 a month, more or less, with at least 46% of the population living at that poverty level. So because Trickle Up in Burkina is really, or Trickle Up as an organization is dedicated to working with the poorest among the poor, our work is concentrated in the north region of the country, where the poverty statistics that I just mentioned to you are lived and experienced by a majority of the population at a rate of nearly 70%. So our program doesn't aim specifically to work with those at the $15 a month mark, but for populations, people who live below that level, so what we call the ultra-poor. So the way we implement our program here in Burkina is through 3 local partners that are stationed in the field and who have extensive experience working with vulnerable populations and who support our participants. So we select our participants.
Can people mute their phones so we don't have feedback? I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a lot of feedback. If everybody could mute their own phone, I think it would make it better for all of us.
Thank you, Susan. If you dial *6, you can mute yourselves.
That's better. Yes, I hear a little bit less noise. Okay. So I'll continue. So
Terry
I was
here.
explaining the process by which we select our participants. And this process is called participatory wealth ranking, which consists of engaging members of a selected community together in an open space. We engage them in an open debate about the social and economic picture of their community. So we do this so that we can gather information about the community, its assets, both economic and social, and to talk about poverty openly and what it looks like in their particular context. So this allows us to really gauge what resources are accessible and understand what options are available in terms of livelihood activities for our future participants. So, and this process also gives us a certain legitimacy in the eyes of the community because they're engaged from the get-go. When our participants are chosen, they benefit from three main components of the program, which you may or may not already know, but I'll just bring everybody up to speed. Those three components are, one, our training. We give our women our very rigorous training in basic business skills. So we help them understand how to separate working capital from profits, identifying viable activities within their communities, basic bookkeeping strategies for women who have not had any formal education, and how to develop good practices really to build a customer base. So once they've received that training, we give them a seed capital grant of $100, which is huge. When we're talking, we consider that we're working with women who, prior to the program, either had no livelihood activity, so literally no income, or maybe could make up to $10, maximum maybe $15 a month. So putting $100 in their hands is really it's really a game changer. It's a life-changing opportunity. And so we also, the third component of our program is the savings groups. We organize them in savings groups so that every week they continue to save. They build a pool, basically, of money, of capital that they can draw from to access credit and expand their businesses. But most importantly, these savings groups also build a support network for these women who, in many ways, have essentially lost, either in part or in whole, the support network that they had that was keeping their families and their livelihoods together. So in 2013, we will have selected 750 participants and formed them into 30 savings groups. So now that we understand how the program works, how we implement our program, I'll talk a little bit more about who the ultra-poor really are. First of all, why we focus on women is really no secret. I think that women are the vehicles of development, particularly at the household level. When we evaluate the impact of helping one woman, we can multiply that impact by at least 5, because at least 5 other people have either directly or indirectly benefited from her ability to provide. And in Burkina, in rural areas, women typically have between 6 and 7 children, and that's not counting pregnancies that have not been carried to term. So I could begin to list off, a number of factors that could explain how they've ended up in this situation, in these conditions, but I think that it'll be more pertinent, and I think you'll see sort of a pattern that emerges through the stories of some of the women that we've spoken to on the ground. So I just want to relate a quote from one of our participants that has just been selected this year. Her name is Aminata, and she is answering a question that we asked her just about what the most difficult period in her life was, or what for her, what does she find to be the most difficult thing that she has to face on a daily basis, and this is her answer. She says, "What makes me suffer is the death of my children and my husband. If I do not get up to fight another day, they will not eat. When you have a husband, he helps you to bring food. If you have a child, who works and has a salary. Perhaps he won't give you food, but he'll give you money to buy what you need. And if you have none of those things, then you suffer, you're nothing. My brothers are also dead, but I have one left who is in my village, but he's blind. So how can I be happy? It's not possible. I have to tell myself that I'm not alone with all of these problems. Sometimes I wander off and leave my home just to find, maybe to run into someone who is worse off than myself, so that it puts me in my place, and I'm able to content myself with eating a piece of toe and drinking water to fight off the hunger. I'm afraid sometimes if I don't look at the big picture, I will wander and lose my head. Sometimes I can't sleep. When I go to the field to cultivate, I scream at the children all the time, but they don't listen to me. People think I've lost my mind, but it's the sadness that really gets the best of me. So Aminata's case is a reflection really not only of the state of mind of some of the women that we work with at the start of the program, but also the circumstances that have led to her poverty, the loss of her entire support system, and the burden of having to take care of her grandchildren, which rests solely on her shoulders. And at her age, as you can see, she's completely worn out both physically and mentally. Another participant of ours who started the program last year was in a similar type of situation. Her name is Juliet, and she talks about her family in the past and how they survived. She says they survived okay. They were not so poor that they couldn't feed themselves. Her husband was able to work in the field and provide, but then he became sick, an illness that lasted 4 years. During that time, they sold all of their productive assets to treat him, but he finally passed away 4 years ago. And suddenly she found herself all alone with her 6 children. She had a couple of animals left, but she really had no livelihood prospects. She was obliged to sell the animals that she had to pay for her children's school fees. And the problem here is that in Burkina, when a husband dies, the woman no longer has a right to assets, either land or animal. They belong to his family. So by selling the remainder of his animals, she basically entered into a feud with the family, and she was shunned by them, which basically cut off that social safety net that could have helped her. So this, she says, this event was the beginning of my suffering. Usually a woman, if she's lucky, her husband's family, if he passes away, will give her a small plot of land to cultivate and to be able to provide for her kids. But generally, it's not the best quality, and hardly it's ever enough to ensure feeding her children throughout the year. So in Juliet's case, the family, her husband's family, ended up chasing her from the home where she lived with her husband, with nowhere to go. She had nothing left to feed her children or herself. After fighting and pleading with her family, her husband's family, she was finally allowed to stay in a vacant hut that belonged to her mother-in-law, who was living elsewhere. She had a distant brother that would send her some millet from time to time, but that was hardly sufficient, especially since the family demanded that she give them a portion of it. And so to find a way to provide, she started making millet beer to sell, which she would draw directly from the stores of food her brother was selling her for her own consumption. And so, Juliet talks about how she really wanted to do more and had plenty of ideas at the time, but she knew that, of course, she had nothing to invest into these ideas and couldn't even imagine really being able to put money aside, because there was always an immediate need for that money. And so Trickle Up really came to Juliet's community at the right time. She was selected to participate in our program, and she immediately put her ideas to work. She had already noticed that no one sold beauty products in the village. You had to go to the nearest town to buy clothes, shoes, or jewelry. And this, she felt, was an opportunity, and she really believed this was going to be a successful business, and she could not have been more right. I mean, when she received her seed capital grant, she invested that money to pay for her transportation to the capital, Ouagadougou. It was actually her first time in the city. She bought children's clothes, cloths, shoes, And she says within 72 hours, she was able to sell everything. So she immediately returned to stock up on more items. On market day, she sold out again. And so for these 2 trips, she says, I made a profit of $40, and it was unbelievable and inconceivable for her. So before my 3rd trip, she says, I took a step back and tried to evaluate, what I was going to do and find a better strategy to maximize my profits. And I remembered something that I learned during the training about studying the market and evaluating what customers want and being the one to supply that demand. And so the holidays, I realized, she says, were coming up, and this is when families buy outfits for their children, and women especially want jewelry and makeup and new shoes. And so I made a point of investing in those specific items. And for the holidays, I made a $100 profit, which is huge. So today, all of Juliet's 6 children are in school, and as she says, they're all very well dressed. She's very proud of. So my husband's death was a horrible time for us. She says, no food, no clothes, no shoes, and no support from his family. And this program literally saved my life. So, we essentially bring together women who have lost so much and whose support systems have either failed them or disintegrated in one way or another. And we help them rebuild the support system through our savings groups. We all know that family is a source of wealth in so many ways. People seek solace, they find equilibrium, they manage to deal with difficult situations when they have this support system. But being alone, especially when your world has fallen apart, as it has in Aminata's case, can be really difficult to overcome. So this is where our savings groups play a role for these women. Aminata's case is not an isolated one. Many of the women who are selected have lost their safety nets, which used to hold their families together. So to that end, the saving groups serve an additional function above and beyond being, financial safety net, which allows them to access credit, expand their businesses. These women are really given an opportunity to join a group of women with similar experiences. They work together, collectively pull themselves out of poverty. They help each other. They give each other advice. And, essentially they become a family. And one of the savings groups that I visited a couple of months back that was reaching the end of their 3 years with Trickle Up was telling me about their plans for the future. And one of the women said, there is no way we can go our separate ways now because we are now one. We're really a family. All of us here have suffered in unimaginable ways. And together we've made a new life for ourselves, and it is not possible for us to go back to the life that we've led in the past. We've learned so much through this experience with Trickle Up, and we want to continue to put that to good use to ensure a better future for ourselves and for our kids. And this is really the case for most of our savings groups. They want to continue working together, and they do. So another one of our savings groups, a dynamic set of women whose profile you may have already read, and I won't go over it again, but they used their savings to invest in a mill that benefited their entire community. But I wanted to touch upon their experience and their example just because they used their savings to help other women found their own savings group. They trained them, they helped them launch their activities, and this sort of paying it forward gesture is not an isolated one. Other women in the community will watch these women and the transformation that they go through and approach them to ask if they'd be willing to help them do the same and start a group of their own. And so one of the women from this group sort of chuckling said, no one ever even looked at us, no one even ever considered us before, and now everyone wants to be like us. We're respected, basically, and that really goes a long way in uplifting these women, uplifting their morale. So the bottom line is that these women want to be able to put food on the table for their families, food which about 95% of them produce themselves. Subsistence farming is the primary activity in rural areas, and this is how they ensure their food security. So when this comes up short, as it almost always does in the case of our participants, they need another strategy. In addition to that, they want to live in a decent home. They want to be able to have health care, or at least be able to pay for the medicine when their children and when they're sick. They want to be able to send their kids to school, and ensure a better future for their kids. So ultimately, they do also want some sort of recognition in their community. They want to exist in their communities and be respected, because the conditions of their existence are really so incredibly dire at times that, they're at a level where none of these basic needs are ever guaranteed. And given their circumstances and lack of options, they're essentially stuck in a sort of vicious cycle that forces them to accept the consequences of their poverty as a sequence of fatalities. A woman that we spoke to recently was telling us, seeing hunger in the eyes of your children and having to put them to sleep without food is a feeling that I can't describe. We as adults can handle it because we're used to it, but having to make our children suffer in this way is impossible. So, we lie awake at night, we try to figure out what to do next, how to do it, all the while deep down knowing that there really is nothing that we can do. We have nowhere to go and we have no one to turn to. So, these women throughout their lives, they're faced with a series of impossible choices, which you can imagine will put them in a certain emotional state at the start of the program. And yet, when they tell us their story, they tell it with sometimes a hint of a smile on their face. And, because as Aminata said, you have no choice. You have to face it. If you don't get up to fight another day, then your children don't eat, and it's as simple as that. And so these are the people that we help. These are the women who benefit from our program. And this is the profile of the women that you've all helped us reach this year. And the livelihoods that we're going to help them develop will not only help feed their families, it will cover the cost of their children's school fees. It will help them pay for medicine. And the bottom line is it could go a long way in saving lives. And this work that we do really, in many ways, alters the trajectory that they were on and puts them on a path to a new beginning. And that's really very important. So once again, thank you, all of you, for your contributions, and I'm open to questions. And yeah, I hope that was informative.
So please unmute yourself to ask a question, and anyone can feel free to chime in.
Can you hear me?
Sure. And just introduce yourself, please.
Am I unmuted, by the way?
Yeah, you're unmuted.
Oh, perfect. This is Sari Shear. How do women feel in the communities who aren't selected? You must, and I came on a few minutes late, so excuse me if this was covered, but there must be some people who go through the process and are deselected or not selected. How do you handle that?
How do we handle women that are deselected or not selected when we go through the process with the PWR?
Yes. What's the impact on the community? What's the impact? How do you?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, the community themselves will select the women. They will essentially categorize the households that are most in need, and that's how we select our women, the participants for our program. And so for those who are not selected, we can say that they don't necessarily fit into that category as ultra poor, the ones that we are specifically targeting. But the impact that the women themselves have once they've started to grow as a group and once they've stabilized their own livelihoods, then they start to reach out to their community. And so a lot of women pay it forward. A lot of women will either reach out to individuals in the community that need help, or and it happens sometimes that women will help another group form if they really would like to emulate what they've been able to accomplish. So there's no there's not a negative impact or a negative sentiment in the community when these women are selected because it was done in a very transparent way. So, we minimize that risk. But, with that said, there's always possibility of maybe some jealous tendencies here and there, but because these women do extend a helping hand often, that sort of, takes care of that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Hi, it's Susan. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between Trickle Up and the local partners and how you work with them and what's your role versus what's their role?
Okay. So Trickle Up basically selected local partners whose mission and goals were aligned with our own, working with extremely vulnerable populations and who also had a good track record of working with these populations. And once they were identified, we started working with them. We provide them with the funds to implement the program. We provide training to reinforce their capacity to implement the program, and we do consistent monitoring of activities in the field. At their level, they are responsible for conducting at the village level for conducting the selection process. They do the verifications. They go to each woman's household that has been selected to verify the conditions that they're living in, and just to make sure that they correspond to the profile that we of the women that we're seeking to aim or to target, and they basically follow up on a weekly and bi-weekly basis. So each organization has someone who is responsible for the Trickle Up program in that region, and that person is responsible then for a village agent, we'll call them, who is local, who lives in the communities where the women have been selected, and who's responsible for following up with them during their savings group dates and ensuring that all savings are recorded and that rules are respected and etc. And so basically that's our relationship. Our partners are the implementing partners. They implement our program. We consistently monitor the activity, and we consistently provide them with the training necessary to reinforce their skills so that they effectively implement our program.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Thank you.
Alexis, just to follow up on Sari's question, can you talk a little bit about social tensions in the home and how you might address those when women are selected?
When women are, I'm sorry?
Selected for the program?
Selected? Social tensions between husband and wife, or?
Yeah, any relationships in the home.
In the home? Areas where there would be some kind of social tension would be perhaps in a polygamous household, right, where there are several wives and maybe one wife was identified. And so there could be tensions between the women. And sometimes, because in Burkina, the region where we work is we'll say that the norm is, that men really have a say in what their wives do. So if they're not, if they don't agree with the livelihood activity that their wife is engaged in, then they can prevent her from doing that, and she really doesn't have much of a choice. And oftentimes men can be jealous or feel in some way as though they are secondary to their wives because their wives are now making more money than they are or bringing in more money. And so that can create tensions. And our partners actually intervene when there are situations like that to mediate and to really sensitize the husbands and explain to them the benefits overall. They try to get them to see the big picture, the benefits that these women's ability to provide for the family and particularly for the children has, and how it's ultimately it's in their advantage to support their wives. So it's difficult to say because these are really case by case. There isn't really an issue with tensions within the home when it comes to our program and the women that we help vis-a-vis their husbands or their co-wives. But when it does happen, our partners, they will talk about it usually in their savings groups, and then in their savings groups, they will talk about it to the village agent that follows up with them, and the village agent will relate that to the partner. And if there's really there needs to be an intervention to mediate and to make sure that the husband doesn't deny the woman her ability to conduct her livelihood activity as she sees fit, then they'll do something about it, and usually it ends up working out. They're able to bring reason, I guess, to the household. So, does that answer your question? Is that what you meant in terms of tensions between households?
Does anyone else have a question?
Well, I have a question. Can you explain generally how the funds that you raise as an organization are broken down, both sort of administrative and then by the global partners and then by the actual recipients?
Mm-hmm. Well, for our recipients, our participants will obtain a $100 grant. So funds are basically, I can tell you where they go. $100 will go to each participant, and then 25% in addition to that. So about 37. Let me see. Hold on 1 minute. I'm converting into dollars. So about $35 per participant is given to our implementing partner to support them in implementing the program. So that's the breakdown here. I don't know, perhaps Rhonda, I don't know if you want to explain a little bit more about the breakdown as an organization, but in terms of how we allocate the funds in the field and to implement the program, that's where the money goes.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to chime in. This is Rhonda Zapaka at headquarters in New York, but basically from the fundraising angle, on an annual basis, our annual operating budget, it ranges basically from $3 to $4 million, depending upon the various funding streams. Over between 60 and 70% of the dollars that we raise on an annual basis come from individual donors, and the remainder are from a combination of corporate, foundation, and public sources, primarily through a couple of grants that we've got, particularly funding our work in Guatemala and also in West Africa to support our People with Disabilities program. So, in a nutshell, that's essentially how the general funding picture breaks down. But, I will also say, I think it was Sari who asked that question, but it does vary from region to region what the cost per participant is on average. But I would also add to Alexice's point about the cost of the seed capital grant, the local partner support that we give. Obviously, we have an investment in the staff that we employ on the ground in the region, such as Alexice and her other colleagues in the other regions, as well as the cost of our staff at headquarters, as well as the funds that we spend to monitor and evaluate our work. So, on an annual basis, we're helping anywhere between, depending upon the year, 6,000 and 8,000 women per year. enroll in the program and go through the program, and that the amount of time that they're in the program really does range from 18 months to 3 years, depending upon the region.
Thank you.
I would just add that the $70,000 that the 100 Women campaign that you've all been able to raise in support of our work, funds 70% of the cost of these 750 women who are going through the program. It really directly funds their capital grants and the $35 partner fee that for the training and other elements of the program that they receive as well. So it's a huge contributor.
Yes, it's a huge portion of the budget in Burkina Faso, which Alexice and her colleagues are doing everything to grow and always looking out for and going after new partnerships and funding sources at the institutional and at the individual level. So you all have been a really big part of that, and we're extremely grateful. We also want to be cognizant of your time, though. We know that you're very busy and that you have very scheduled calendars and lives. So I guess with that,
if there are any final burning questions, please feel free to speak up now.
And we will also send you a follow-up email with a link to the article that Alexice mentioned, the Women of the Village of Peru and the platform that they've started. And we'll certainly distribute other relevant materials so that you can really see what kind of a difference you're making. And again, we greatly appreciate it, and greatly appreciate Alexice making the time out of her day to do this call at this time. Thanks, Alexice.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you.
All right, thank you all for joining us, and feel free to reach out with any follow-up questions. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.